even Howard one Johnson, they got this good and got this good all the time. I ain't even saying what you're supposed to. I need to give you some news and it's in a word today. Now I hold to this news today. Baby left, left in the bag to be bad, in the woods, and that's horrible how a mother can do to a child, So baby and the case, the mother was arrested nearly 4 years ago. This happened 4 years ago. After the newborn found in a plastic bag in the woods. So the First County Sheriff Office announced Camilo, had been arrested in an investigation of the child abandonment, 4 years ago. So this had been 4 years investigation. Finally, a breakthrough. That this young woman, had done something so incredible, to leave a baby in a bag in the woods. Who can do that? This young woman was found June the 6th, 2019. Just before significant thunderstorm hit this county. How the baby, was found, they call it a divine intervention. They call it divine because how this baby was found. It was like a miracle. Like God was just right there watching over this baby. So it was God, that this little girl has survived, because she did survive. She is still living today. I mean, she's 4 years old. So there was people, to hear. There was people that heard a sound. There was two teenagers. They heard a sound in the woods. That they thought was a wild animal, but at the same time, it sounded like a baby crying. And most people, we'll be scared to go in the woods, because that's where the possums and raccoons and all that's animals and stuff. So they went home, because if there was an animal at the same time, in their mind, it sounded like a baby crying. So yes, it was a divine protection. Two teenager girls who couldn't let it go. They couldn't let it go because they thought, it sounded like a baby crying. To a dad that they convinced to go out in the middle of the night. Now they went home, and it was still on their mind, that this sounded like a baby crying. So they probably couldn't sleep. So they went in the middle of the night to go check on this baby. To go check on this sound, to check on the weird sound in the woods and discover that the first response, the deputy Terry, so Sean, an infant, what they should have been Sean, so they called the police firsthand, and it was the first deputy that came on site, and they stated back then that they would bring this person to justice. Whoever was responsible for this, we will find them and bring them to justice. Because that was just horrible. They said it was wrapped. It was tied. They said a baby was tied up in a plastic bag. Left in the woods to die. So the little girl, so little did they know, you know, it was going to take them 4 years. They didn't know it was going to take them 4 years because back then, 4 years ago, they didn't even took no DNA test until 10 months later. You know, if they would have took a DNA test back then, and when she had just had the baby, they could have found out who the mother was that same year. But 10 months ago, they had taken a DNA test. Investigation, the sheriff office was able to identify, the father, so they identified the father first, and they were able to utilize again, they did another DNA test, were able to identify the birth parent of the baby, so their goal was to identify who was responsible, for trying to kill this baby, just left the baby out in the woods in the woods. In the woods where they got the animals, they got the rats, they got the raccoons and possums. Nothing did not harm their baby because that was the divine protection. That was watching over this little baby. Until someone find this child. So every detective Every detective they assigned to this case was a detective that was a father, was a parent itself. You know, who would have emotion, you know, who would have feelings on this case. You know, so the sheriff officer arrest Kimira, you know, she was 40 years old. You know, the DNA evidence confirmed, you know, that she is a biological birth parent, you know, of this baby. You know, so she should cooperate with the detective. You know that she had been charged with criminal attempt to commit murder. You know, and cruelty to children in the first degree. You know, aggravated assault. You know, reckless. You know, abandonment. You know, so plenty. She have plenty charges on her. You know, and she have other charges on her, and how someone could have ability to leave their own child laying there, wrapped up in a bag to die. You know, and they have so many people want a baby, can't have a baby. You know, so they're not going to discuss the motive. You know, because they're still investigating. You know, in details. You know, so they right now they don't have no motive. They're still investigating, still asking them questions. Um, but this been 4 years ago. You know, and if you feel like, and just if you feel like you can't afford to raise a child, just go all across the nation. You know, first they have, you can leave your child at the hospital if you feel like you don't want it, you feel like you can't afford to take care of a child, whatever the case may be. You can leave it at the hospital. You know, second, you can leave the baby at the police station. And third, you can leave it at a fire station. You know, so you have options that what you can do with a baby besides wrapping it up and putting it in a bag and just leave it out in the woods for animals to attack. You know, so she did not leave her child, you know, at any of these locations. And that'd be the best location if you feel like you don't want a child. You don't have to kill a child. You don't have to throw a child away. You don't have to do none of these things. These three things that I named, the hospital, the police, and the fire station, is a proper place where you can leave your child if you feel like you don't want it. You know, so the child is not only under safe harbor law, but any place this child could be found. You know, this child was tied up, you know, in a plastic bag. Tied up in a plastic bag. Thrown into the woods, you know, like a bag to be thrown away. You know, so thank God, you know, this baby are still alive. Thank God this baby is still alive. Thank God he had a divine, you know, protection over this baby. And God kept this baby alive with his power. God kept this baby alive till someone come and rescue this baby. You know, so this happened 4 years ago. You know, please, all across the nation, you know, please listen to this. If you know you are pregnant, if you know, if you know you are pregnant, at the beginning of the stage, you know, start making decisions if you feel like you don't want this pregnancy. You know, meaning, you know, find someone, you know, who may want a baby. You know, find a shelter who may accept the baby. They have many options that you can take. Then go to a 9 months. You know, instead of going through the 9 months, having a baby, then put it out and have it sit out. You know, to be picked up or either be torn up by an animal. You know, so you have options to make. You know, if you know you're pregnant at the beginning, but you feel like it's a mistake or you feel like you don't want it, you know, to have options, you can start asking around who want a baby. Or you could take it to a shelter who wants a baby. They got plenty of shelters that sell babies to parents that wants babies. You know? So and if you go through the whole 9 months, you know, drop them off and leave it at the hospital, the police station, the fire station, or you find somebody that wants a baby. You know, I'm pretty sure someone will come forward and want to accept their child to keep you from throwing it away or do the baby any kind of harm. You have options that you can do than wrapping the baby up. You know, that goes for anyone across the nation. You know, these are options that you can do. You know, you can leave it at the hospital. That would have been the best thing. You know, leave it at the hospital. You know, don't leave the hospital with the baby knowing you don't want it. You know, so these are options that you can do. Because I don't want to hear just anymore about somebody putting a baby in a plastic or the trash can or whatever the case is. Please, there are options that you can do. You can leave the baby at the hospital, the police station, the fire station, or call someone that want a baby. So many people cannot get pregnant, they want a baby. You know, so we're gonna talk about the word for today. God promised David. You know, God had promised David all kinds of stuff. You know, and David held on. You know, David had waited for his time. You know, so you're gonna come from 2 Samuel chapter 7 1 through 17. So after the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies around him. You know, David had just become king. You know, Saul had just died, but David had two battles already, back to back. You know, his first two battles. You know, so now David just had become king, and he had two battles back to back. You know, so now he is settled. You know, and God had given him rest. You know, from his enemies. You know, the rest gonna just be for a little while. You know, he gonna be at it again. You know, so David had said to Nathan, you know, to prophet. You know, now this is a prophet that God has sent out to encourage a lot of other prophets, like we do have now on our platform. You have a lot of prophets that are covering, you know, encourage you. You know, to move forward, so don't be, you know. So Nathan is one of those prophets that he always encouraged you. You don't have no strength and you feel weak. You know, he encouraged Samuel a couple of times, but this is the first time we hear of his name now. You know, so Nathan is the prophet. Now here I am. Now David saying, here I am. I'm living in a house of Caesar while the order of God remained in a tent. You know, so this is the first time Nathan the prophet is mentioned. You know, God made certain that a prophet was living during the reign of each of the kings of Israel. You know, so the prophet main task was to urge the prophet. You know, like I say, God will always have prophets that encourage. That's why God prophets all have different purpose. Like the Levites and like the Levites and who that was, Samuel's sons. You know, their main goal was to keep the order of God. You know, they's the only ones to handle their priests, and they're the only ones to handle God order of God. You know, so a lot of us prophets have different goals. You know, some is a priest, some of them is some is a judge, you know, and some of is a regular priest anointed to priest. Some of is have purpose to lead his people, you know. So he urged the people to follow God. You know, that's his job, to follow God, and to communicate God's law and plan to the king. So Nathan is a prophet of God. Now who give messages from God, you know, and he also, like Samuel, encouraged. You know, Samuel was one too. You know, he always encouraged Saul. He always encouraged David. He was that kind of prophet. God gonna always send that kind of prophet to encourage his other prophet. And you remember Elijah. Elijah was a prophet, but sometimes your prophet, you know, sometimes have a heavy load, and sometimes God will send a prophet to uplift you. You know, and so that's what he was. Samuel also was that kind of prophet too. To obey God's laws, you know, so he'll encourage them. So now David is thinking about, remember David had moved the order of God by 2 or 3 times. You know, now he's thinking about moving it again. You know, so Nathan replied, you know, whatever you have in mind, He said, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you. Because see, he just talked to God. And so he talked to God. So David thinking about moving again. So he said, whatever you decide to do, he said, do it. He said, God is with you. So the same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, now God is about to give David a message, from God. He about to give David a message from God. And God about to lay it out. Now God, God loved David. You know, God made a promise to David. And God stuck with David the whole time. He was faithful to David the whole time until he stepped in his position. You know, so God had came to Nathan. God came to Nathan. Now, this is what the Lord said. Now, the Lord telling this to Nathan to give this message to David. Are you the one, to build me a house to dwell in? So I have not dwelt in a house from the day that I brought the Israelite up out of Egypt to this day. So I have been moving from place to place, with a tent as my dwelling. So whatever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers, whom I command to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built me a house? I said, now see this what God said. God said, I done brought y'all out of Egypt, David, I done got you from out the field, and I done known you. How come you ain't built me a house yet? So God said, how come you ain't built me a house yet? So God had told Nathan, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty said. I took you from the field, from tending your flocks. You remember God, when God and Samuel first got there, David was in the field. God saw Samuel saw all his brothers, but David was the one in the field, tending to his flocks and sheep and everything else, So God pulled him away from that and appointed him ruler over his people Israel. So I have been with you, whatever you have gone. Remember he was running from here to there, cave to cave, and God was with him that whole time. God was faithful. God was watching over him. I have cut off all your enemies from before you. And he was. He did. God did. When Saul was still the king, David still had enemies because he was so good in what he did, what he does, because he had God with him. So a lot of times you're going to get that, because he had God with him. And so God always was with David when enemies tried to come. Remember that lady, Gabriel's husband. Remember he was mean and cruel to David. What God did to him. God gave him a heart problem until he collapsed right there. That's why him treating David like that. So David, to God say, I dealt with your enemies. I cut your enemies off before you. So now I will make your name great. God about to make his name great. Make your name great like the name of the greatness of men on earth. You're going to be the greatest man on earth, and I will provide a place for my people. Now, this is a promise that God is making to David. Now, Nathan going to send this message to David, Israel, and I will plant them so that they can have a home of their own. So he's saying that the Israelites going from here and there. They're going from here and there. So the Canaanite land supposed to be for the Israelites. But they catch themselves going from here and there because they're letting people rule them in their own land, taking them out their own land. So God said, I need a shelter for my people. Why have you not built a shelter yet? My people going from here to there. They need a shelter of their own. So that's what God is saying. They need a shelter of their own. So and no longer be so they won't no longer be disturbed. See, they just out in the open right now. They're going from here and there. God don't want to keep going from here and there. I give you that land. Y'all, I need a shelter built for them. So they can call it their own. So they won't have nobody disturbing them. To ever have a door somebody can knock on and not just come in. So wicked people will not oppress them anymore. So as they did in the beginning. So God trying to change things around, because they're supposed to be a nation. God gave them that land. No one not supposed to be oppressing them. No one not supposed to be disturbing them. No one not supposed to be keep on knocking them out of their lane. When God gives something to you, we got to fight to keep it. So God stated all this, have done, ever since the time I appointed leader over my people Israel. So this what he's saying with David. You know, he's saying not Saul didn't do none of this here stuff. But God's saying to David, my people need a shelter. They need a house. Why have you not built a house, for my people that gone from here to there? People to no one to be disturbing them, you know. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. And so the Lord declared, to that the Lord Himself, the Lord God said Himself, I will establish a house for you. Now God said Himself, He gonna establish a house for David. Now see, God about to make a promise to David, just like He did with Abraham. And that's who the Israelite is. The Israelites are offspring of Abraham. God made that promise. See, when God make a promise to you, that promise go on until after your death. And that's what He about to do the same thing with David. He making a promise to David now and after his death. He gonna be established. And God said, myself, I'm about to establish you and your offspring. So God promised David rest, from all his enemies. This is the fulfillment, for the time during David reign. So God Himself will establish a house for David. He about to establish something for David and his whole offspring. And so David ain't gonna understand, because see, David don't have no. That's how Abraham was. God made a promise to him when Abraham had no children. He like, well, how my own wife gonna be the mother of the nation? My God, you don't have no kids. If God said your wife gonna be a mother of the nation, if God said your son, you're gonna be on that throne, that's what He said. So now He's doing the same thing with David. David don't have no kids right now, and God about to make a promise to him. Make a promise that down the line you will have children. So even when his days are over, and that's what I was saying, after his death, this promise still gonna go on and on. That's why God loved the Israelites. Because the promise is still going on and on after He done made this promise with Abraham. Now He about to make the same promise with David. So even after David's days is over, and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring, to succeed you, your own flesh and blood. Now He telling him, your own flesh and blood, mean you're gonna have children. You not from your slave person, not from somebody else. That's what He had to tell Abraham. Sarah made a mistake, put the slave guard on. He said, no, that's not going to be the one going to be on the throne. Your own flesh and blood going to be on this throne. And see, that's why God had to move Jonathan out the way. Because Jonathan told David he next in line after David. And God said, no. David is going to be on that throne. After David, it's going to be Solomon who God going to bring place to be on that throne. See, God have things in line that they don't even have to be here yet, but they're going to be here. So He said your own flesh and blood, meaning He will have a child. That child going to be Solomon. Solomon going to be on that throne. And I will establish His kingdom. He is the one who will build the house in my name. Now, see, He's saying why David ain't built this house for his people. They're going from here and there. They ain't got no shelter. But He said, okay, don't worry about it right now. Don't worry about it. Because your own flesh and blood gonna be the one who gonna build this house. Don't worry about it, David. Okay, I got somebody gonna do it. Your own flesh and blood about to do this here. And so, and I will establish, the throne of His kingdom, forever. See, God said, I'm going to establish something forever like he did Abraham. He's still taking care of Abraham's offspring, the Israelite. You know, this went on for 2,000 years. God established them. God took care of them. God stuck to his promise to Abraham. They stood on that earth for 2,000 years. So, but yet, God promised doesn't, end there. His promise doesn't end there. He got some more promise. You know, so in the continue after David's death, and it's fulfilled, completely through Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ is a bloodline of David. So this gonna be this who gonna come in. See David, Jesus is his bloodline. So God has said the fulfillment gonna be completely through Jesus Christ that reign as King of Kings. Remember they called Jesus at the end, the King of Kings. That's what they had on his crown. Of the seed of David. Jesus is the fulfillment of God's promise to David. And see, we all didn't know, that Jesus was a bloodline of David. But Jesus is a bloodline of David. That who gonna come after David. Who coming after David? Of a king forever on the throne. Jesus is the throne. The kingdom gonna be Solomon, the throne. Who gonna be on that throne? Gonna be Jesus. And the rest of his enemies. So Jesus, when Jesus come in, that's why he said when Jesus come in, it's gonna be the fulfillment of the promise of David. Forever they're gonna be on the throne. So this pagan record, the covenant that God had made with David, promising to carry on David's line forever. Just like he done with Abraham. He carried on the promise that he made to Abraham, to Israelite. And Israelite, they've been so wicked and everything else. But God been still sticking to his promise that he made to Abraham. So he's doing the same thing with David. David don't have no children right now. Abraham ain't had no children at the time when God had brought the promise to him. So David's bloodline gonna be established forever. Now this promise will be fully realized in the birth of Jesus Christ. So God is saying that he doesn't want David to build a house for him. He don't want him to build a house for him. Because God had told David that his job was to unify and lead the Israelite, and to destroy his enemy. So by his position, it's to protect the Israelite and to fight their enemies. That means he's shedding blood. And he can't help it because it's his position. So that's why Solomon gonna have to come in. Because David's position, and see, the building the house, Solomon gonna take about 7 years. So David cannot stop what he doing. So his position is to protect the Israelite. So he can't just, how he gonna protect the Israelite fighting war and still trying to build the temple for God. So that's why God said, okay, your position, is to take care of my people, to protect my people, to fight this war, so my people won't be falling down, from these enemies. That's your job, okay? So I can't help you to stop what you're doing to build the house. You shedding blood, so that's where your son gonna come in at. So now his position will require David to shed great blood and great deal of blood. So God did not, want his temple built by a mighty water. So God will establish the throne, of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. And when he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod. That's also in the Bible. By men. So with infliction by human hands. By God say his love will never be taken away from him. Because you remember he took his love away from Saul. Saul had disobeyed him. And God just, God had just was just like done with him. You know, God took his love away from him. God took his spirit away from Saul. So now God making a promise with David that it will not happen with him. You know, so he said, I will never take away, from him. As I will never, God said his love would never be taken away from him as I took away from Saul. Whom I removed from before you. So to God to move Saul out the way, for David to start stepping into his purpose. Now we don't know why God allowed Saul to stay in for a long time, 20 years. Because see, God had known David when he was like 17, he was like 17 years old, and just not getting in position after 20 years. So God still had some kind of feeling for Saul that he did not move Saul out the way right then and there. He still allowed Saul to be the king. So he said, I remove from before you. Whom I removed from before you. He's saying he moved Saul away, for him. Your house in your kingdom, will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established, forever. After God had told Nathan everything he want him to tell David. Now see, this is everything. This is the promise that God is making to David. And but he give it to Nathan for Nathan to pass it on to David. So Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation. Now we see that God made a promise to David, and God spoke these words to Nathan to translate back to David. So one, why have you built me a house? My people gone from here to there. And they have not been established, in a house. So too, God also let him know how he feel. God also know how he feel. Now God had found him in the field, treading his flocks and sheep and everything else, and God had planted him. So God said, in other words, God saying, when I found you, you was on this level here. See, we always be on this level here. God is the one that raised us up. So that's why God letting him know, okay, I found you in the field. You was in the field. You was in a level in the field. You didn't know nothing about rising up or being a king. So God pulled you away from tending to your sheep and flocks and everything. Then I appoint you to be a king, over my people. And then I cut off your enemies. God was protecting them. God cut up his enemies and everything. Every time they try to come against David to try to harm David, God always step in. And the last, he made your name great. He made your name great. Because I already knew that you was under Saul. But now you're a king. God make your name great. God done took you from the fear. God anointed you to be a king. And God done took you to be among other kings. And now God had to rise you up. So God let you know, don't forget about where you come from. You come from the field. So you come from the field. And now I done rise you up, and I made your name great. Your name is spread all over this nation. So God made a promise, that for himself, that himself will establish the house for David forever. Even when his days is over, God will raise up your offspring to succeed his own flesh and blood also will establish the kingdom. And now David don't have no children right now, but he will have a son. And gonna be Solomon. Solomon gonna be the one gonna have the kingdom. Jesus gonna come behind it, another bloodline, gonna be on the throne. So all these things gonna be established forever, just like Abraham promised. So his son is the one who will build a house in my name. He will establish the throne of the kingdom forever, which would be Jesus. Now David, his kingdom and his throne, will be established forever. You know, so remember, God made a covenant with Abraham. You know, and after his death, God is still taking care of his offspring. You know, which is the Israelite, and that's why God loved them, and that's why God is so faithful to them. And so now we see that God is doing the same thing with David. You know, after David's death, you know, God will still take care of his offspring. You know, Jesus is in David's bloodline. You know, through his earthly father Joseph. You know, and his son will be the one who will build the house of God. You know, David's son is gonna be the one who gonna build the house of God. You know, and they're gonna be Solomon. Jesus gonna come after Solomon. You know, see, David born in Bethlehem. Jesus gonna be born in Bethlehem. You know, because they're in the same bloodline, and Jesus' earthly father is Joseph, and that's how he got to be in that bloodline. Because Joseph is in the bloodline of David, and you know, and he's taking care of Jesus, taking care of Jesus. You know, and so we see that God made a promise to David, and this promise gonna go on forever, even after his death. You know, just like Abraham. You know, so God made this promise. You know, so God promised is still sticking with Abraham. So you know He gonna do the same thing with David. You know, see, I ain't know about this. That's why I'm so glad I'm doing these stories. You know, by detail, chapter to chapter. You know, because we all learning the details, you know. So I didn't know he made a promise with David. That's why I'm learning all this as I go along teaching to y'all, you all. You know, so we also talk about this mother that's 40 years old. You know, she had a baby and decided she didn't want a baby. Tied the baby up, put it in a bag, and left it in the woods to die. For the animals to just eat it up. You know, but we have a divine protection. You know, we have a high mighty God that watch over this baby. You know, God kept the baby alive, kept the baby crying, so someone can hear this baby. That was divine protection. You know, and so we had two teenagers walking by. They heard something, you know, but we'll be too scared to go in the woods, you know, but they heard a weird sound. But then when they went home, they realized the sound sounded like a baby crying, you know. So they went in the middle of the night to check on that, and they saw what it was, and they hurried up and called the police. The sheriff came. Now, what they did, they had every detective on this case who was a father of this self, you know, that will have emotion and feeling on this case. And they will put all their energy into this case, you know, to solve this case. You know, this case happened like 4 years ago. You know, they didn't do a DNA test until 10 months later. You know, 10 months later, then they did DNA test and found identify who the parents are to this baby. Thank God the baby is still alive. Thank God, you know, that, you know, with his divine protection, his power, you know, that kept this baby safe and kept this baby alive. So that is good news. You know, so now this young woman is charged with all kind, you know, and I would question, you know, that this woman, you know, she served her time of what she did. You know, um, and I also say across the whole nation, any woman, you know, if you feel like you're pregnant and you feel like it's not what you want, you know, make a decision early on, you know, meaning find shelters that want this baby. You know, they have plenty communities, plenty companies that will accept this child and find a home for this baby. You know, or either you go through the 9 months and you realize you don't want the child. Don't kill the child. Don't leave the child in the woods or in the trash can nowhere. Leave the child in a hospital. Leave the child at a police station. Leave the child at the fire station or either one of them shelters that deal with infant babies that's trying to find home for these babies. You have plenty of options to do. Don't never kill the child. Put the child in a bag and or the trash can or the woods. Don't do none of that. You know, if you feel like you don't want to, just leave it at the hospital. You know, there'll be a good place for you to leave it at, and then know exactly what to do because they will take care of that child until they find a shelter for that baby. You know, so that's the news for today. And you know, I talk about God promised to David. You know, it was a kind of promise that he did with Abraham. You know, and this promise here is like Jesus in David's bloodline. You know, so David's son Solomon gonna be on the throne, and Jesus gonna come behind Solomon and be on that throne. So David bloodline, you know, gonna be established for life, even after David's death. You know, so that's all I have for you today. You know, it's so beautiful out there. You know, y'all have a blessed and safe day, and I see y'all on the next video.